I'm Scott Wapner. We begin with the fallout from the surprise resignation of President Trump's chief economic advisor, Gary Cohn. Stocks are falling as we speak. They're off the worst levels. But as you see, the Dow Jones Industrial Average is still down at this hour by 270 points. It's a loss of 1%. Investors clearly trying to game what that departure means to the markets. For more insight on that and what's really happening inside the Trump White House, let's bring in President Trump's former communications director, Anthony Scaramucci. Anthony, welcome.
Hey, Scott, thanks for having me on.
It's good to have you on. You know Gary Cohn well. The markets are clearly on edge. What do you make of his resignation?
Well, listen, I think the world of Gary. I mean, he added an enormous amount of value during the tax plan. He's a, as you know from his experience at Goldman Sachs, he's a great team builder. He's incredibly smart on markets, arguably one of the smartest people I've ever met in my life on markets across the spectrum. And so he added a tremendous amount of value inside the White House. And, you know, one of the things about the White House, which we all know, we serve at the discretion of the president. For me, it was to serve for 11 days. On the 12th day, I was no longer serving at the discretion of the president. And so I think there was obviously a conversation there, and Gary decided that this was a good time to leave. And as the president has mentioned, he'll find somebody very, very capable to replace him. But Gary did an amazing job on the tax plan, amazing job of giving a lot of advice. The economy's doing very, very well. The policies that the president has put together on the economy have resounded in not only economic growth, but real wages, Scott. It's reflected in the stock market. There's a little bit of volatility as we get to a resolution on what a potential tariff would look like, although I think the president, Peter Navarro, and others inside the White House have been very clear that they're really just looking for symmetry and fairness across the board on trade and not necessarily anything more than that. And so as your analysts know and as people around Wall Street know, for 71 years or 72 years since the end of the Second World War, the United States has had uneven trade deals with many of the now Western or Asian industrialized nations. And all the president is saying is that it's unfair to our workers, it's unfair to the average American middle and lower class families. And so no problem, we'll go with a symmetrical trade fairness, but you have to sort of lower your tariffs, increase the quotas of goods and services flowing into your country from the United States.
But you have, Anthony, I mean, you have just articulated trade policy in a way that the president, to this point, has not. And that's one of the reasons why the markets have been so on edge ever since the president began talking about tariffs last week on what seemed to many people like a whim.
Well, I don't think it was a whim. I mean, if you go back over 20 or 30 years as a business person, even taking out an ad as long ago as 1987 in the New York Times, the president has called for, when he was a business person, more fairness, more evenness in the trade situation. I think we're all being a little bit unfair to the president and jumping the gun right now. At least the markets are, in the sense that he's a very smart business person. He's proven to be an incredible negotiator. I think he's just trying to send a message to people. Look at what he did on NATO. Sent a message to people. Listen, you guys are below your 2% on the GDP allotment. You signed the treaty. You've got to start bringing yourselves up to that level. He's the first president really to push that. That is starting to happen, which is strengthening that sort of commitment to NATO. And I think he's basically saying the same thing here. I think we have to wait. I think what's happening here is markets are probably overreacting to the shock of the idea of potential tariffs. But I think what the president said yesterday from the Oval, or I don't know exactly where he was from, but he basically said that there won't be a trade war. Doesn't see a need for a trade war. And so I think we got to give him some credit that he's a very good negotiator. I think he's looking out for the interests of the American people, looking out for the American workers. And I think that he wants to right-size this and get it fair for America. Now,
do you think that
you guys know
the
this,
tariffs?
We've lost 60,000 factories since the signing of NAFTA, and we got to fix that.
Do you think the tariffs are a mistake?
Well, are they being imposed? Let's see what happens, and let's see what the actual imposition of those tariffs are. I know the White House is about to make an announcement, or thinking about making an announcement. After they do that, if you want to call me back in, I'll analyze what they actually said and what's actually being imposed, and then we can discuss it. In years past, they have had uneven results But I think this time is a little different because the president is actually a business person first, politician second, as you look at his life. And I think he's really looking to see if he can make headway with these international countries in terms of their fairness and symmetry on trade. So let's see what they are. And I would say to market participants that they're overreacting right now because by and large, what he has proven over the last 13 months is that he's a common sense person on the economy. He's a common sense person on economic growth and American prosperity. And you can see it in the wage data. Wages are up, first time since 2006. And look at our GDP. We didn't get 1 quarter of a 3% GDP print in the last administration. That's 8 years, Scott. We've gotten 3 prints like that since President Trump became president. And so I would caution people not to overreact here.
We've gotten 3% prints. We just haven't gotten it on an annual basis under President Obama. So let's just make sure the facts are straight.
Yeah, actually, I maybe I have it wrong. I read that there wasn't 1 quarter where we actually got a 3% print over the 8 years. So we can check that. But I would make this argument then, if you're right on that, I would make this argument that the growth over that 8 years was primarily anemic. The growth now, with the prospect of less regulation, more competitive tax structure, is way better. American businesses are reinvesting. They're downloading additional profits into the form of wages, increase in minimum wages, middle wages, et cetera. And so, there's been 2.7 or 2.8 million jobs created. There's a buoyant optimism for the economy, and I predict that will continue. But I think we just got to give it time to see the policy material.
Are you suggesting, though, that the president may not go through with the tariffs because he certainly has given no indication that he's backing down, and he said as much?
I didn't suggest that, but I am taking the president at his word that he doesn't expect there to be a trade war. That I believe. I didn't say that because I don't know what the actual end result policy will eventually be promulgated, but I am taking the president at his word that he doesn't think there will be a trade war, and I don't think he's indicating that he wants a trade war. But again, I think what he does want, and you have to look at it clinically, and you have to look at what we often call free trade, is imbalanced trade or unfair trade in the United States, and very free trade for our trading partners. I think what the president's basically saying, it's time to right-size that. That'll be better for middle America, better for the middle class, lower middle class families. So I think that's the message, and I think we need to wait to see how this thing unfolds.
But you've said all of the things that Gary Cohn is, right, that you've said, the important role that he played under the tax policy, the important voice that he has to the markets. How concerned should investors be today that Gary Cohn, that critical voice, one that you know so well, is leaving?
Okay, well, listen, I love Gary. I think he's a world-class guy. The White House didn't miss a beat after I left. He's a way bigger loss than me by a factor of 200. But Charles de Gaulle once said that when you walk the graveyard, it's loaded with indispensable men and women. And so maybe he just said men, but I'll add women for this sake of this argument. At the end of the day, we have a tremendous talent pool in the United States. The president is correct that many people will be attracted to that job. He'll be able to recruit a very good person for that job. And the president also is commending Gary for a job well done. This guy is a superstar. He's excelled at everything in his career. And I'll tell you right now, as an investor, wherever he's going next, I would certainly want to be an owner of the equity of whatever he's participating in his life. But we know that none of us are indispensable. The country is very well positioned for economic growth and economic opportunity. Our corporations, as a result of the tax plan that Gary and Steve, or Secretary Mnuchin and Gary Cohn put together, and the president signed and got through the Congress, is going to lead to an acceleration of growth and prosperity for the U.S. And I think you've got to step back and look at the macros here. The economic dashboard hasn't looked this good in a decade. And I think the market should take a pause here, reflect on what I'm saying, and reflect on what a macro analysis would be of this situation. And I predict, further growth ahead, Scott.
Let me ask you, Anthony, what you think it's like inside the White House as we speak, amid some reports, and people use the words chaos, which yesterday the president shot back against. But he did say, and I quote, "I like conflict. I like having two people with two points of view. I like watching it. I like seeing it." And I'm wondering, Anthony, if you think some of that conflict is getting in the way of the president's process.
Well, I mean, again, you have to look at the results. So, just step back. Whatever some people don't like about the style, or some people don't like about some of the rougher edges of the conversations, you have to step back and look at the results and look at the opportunity that's being created for, the average American person. At the end of the day, after 26 campaign rallies, what I can tell you is that the president is turning a group of working class people. I came from a family of aspirational working class people. We've had a period of time now of desperational working class people, and the president is turning that. And so he's restoring that dream to American families across the of America. So to me, if there's a little roughness in the White House, or there's some rotation, you have to also remember he's an entrepreneur. And so I built two businesses. The first 2 years of the businesses that I built, unfortunately, we had heavy turnover as we were trying to get the system right and the culture right to accelerate the.
But this is a lot of turnover, right? I mean, if this was a Fortune 500, we'd be saying, "What's going on?"
But it's not. But it's not. Okay, he's an entrepreneur. He's a maverick. The American people elected a disruptor. They're certainly worried about certain shenanigans that go on inside of Washington. They put the president in place there to help dislodge that or break some of that nonsense. And he's an entrepreneur. And so what he's going to do, he's going to bring an entrepreneur skill set to the game. That means there'll be potential conflict and a little bit of cross-roughing. It'll mean some turnover. If you look at businesses that are startups, and any of these large businesses now, whether it's Dell, Amazon, Microsoft, et cetera, they experience in the early stages, the 1 to 2 year early stages, high turnover. And so let's analyze the president from his business career and from the maverick nature of the business that he's created. And you step back and look at it, I don't think the turnover, myself included, I'm a casualty of that turnover. I don't think the turnover is that big of a deal.
It is higher, though, than the prior two administrations, which certainly seems to raise some questions about what's happening there. Who wants to work in the White House? The president obviously defending that as well yesterday.
Unlimited talent supply of people that will work in the White House and work for President Trump. But also remember, you had 44 presidents prior to President Trump. He is unique. He didn't have governmental experience like a Dwight Eisenhower that didn't have any political experience, or an Andrew Jackson. He is unique. He moved from the American business community into the American presidency in 17 short months, and he's bringing his business style to Washington. And so,
right. But I've made the point, though, that most businesses, certainly ones that we would deal with on a daily basis on this particular network, don't necessarily operate that way. And we would all have questions. Anthony, if you were running a business that had this much turnover within this short period of time of 1 year, we may step back and say, what's really happening?
Well, listen, I did, though. Skybridge Capital, which now has 70 people and 10, 11 billion of management, in the first 1 to 2 years. So again, I'm looking at the results. Step back, look at the economic dashboard, look at the progress made on regulation. Look at the American results are there. Some people don't like it from a historical precedent point of view. It's probably not fitting cutter of past administrations or precedents. He has a remote. You have to recognize as an analyst that he's very different than his 44 predecessors. And so, and I predict that he'll have a even better 18 than he had of 17, and by 19, he'll have that staff figured out, and it'll work in a way that's responsive to his personality.
Let me ask you this, Anthony.
And I'm optimistic about it.
Let me ask you this. We're also having a bit of an issue with your line that you're calling in on, so I may have to let you go in a second, but hopefully not.
Yeah.
We've talked about some of the conflict that the president himself says that he likes. Speaking of conflict, you yourself have been highly critical of the Chief of Staff, General John Kelly. Why?
Well, listen, I was just trying to point out the obvious that there's a way to run a civilian staff that's different from but I've already made my statement on that. Scott, so you can refer to the statements that I made. I don't want to keep going back to that and making that a big issue.
But there's another news organization, Anthony, is reporting that you were enabled, if not, the word they used was emboldened, by the president to attack General Kelly.
And those are personal statements of mine. They have nothing to do with anybody else. And I don't know why that's being reported. But as I said that last night at a event I was speaking at. I'm entitled to my opinion. General Kelly certainly has his opinion of me. We're entitled to each other's opinions. That's my personal opinion, nobody else's opinion.
The president hasn't directly given you the green light to attack General Kelly?
Has not, and not something that I would even not something I would even talk about.
Do you think that the general is standing in the way of your deal for Skybridge? I
don't know. The deal is 14 months long now. It's a small fund of funds that I sold in order to serve the nation. You may remember when we were in Washington together before the inaugural, I was designated to be the OPL director in the White House. I don't know. We'll have to see how this thing unfolds. I have a question mark about what is going on, and I've trusted the process, and I've elected not really to comment about it. But, I find it hard to imagine that the sale of my company is a national security issue. But we'll have to see.
Do you think it's going to go through?
We'll have to see, Scott. I don't know. I mean, right now, certainly the acquirer would like it to go through. We would like it to go through. But it requires CFIUS approval, and we'll have to see. We'll leave it up to the CFIUS people.
There are others who, Anthony, are gaming whether you're going to get back into the White House or if you're trying to get back into the White House. Do you think that's in your future?
No, I do not think that's in my future. I'm not trying to get back in the White House. I'm frankly focused very much so on my family and growing my business and growing my business career. I had 11 days in Washington. You could also say it was 954,000 seconds, Scott. It seems like a long time ago, and it's in my rearview mirror. I wish everybody well there, including General Kelly. But I'm making an observation, which I think is fact-based, and I stand by my observation, but it's also my independent individual opinion, which I feel I'm entitled to.
Let me ask you as we close, Anthony, we know how closely the president pays attention to how the stock market is performing. Since the tariff announcement happened, or at least the president's comments that his tariffs would go into effect as early as the announcement would come this week, stocks have been down every day since. They're down at the lows of the day now by 300 points. How do you think that in and of itself is potentially influencing President Trump in his decision-making process on these tariffs?
I don't know the answer to that, but like any good business person, I don't think he's watching the ticks of the market. I think he's playing a very long-term game for the American people, and I think he wants to get the trade policy right for the American people over a very long period of time. He said something a couple of weeks ago which really is indicative of his personality. He's willing to take the hits. He was in that DACA meeting. There were 55 minutes of live television. And he looked around at the room and he said, I'll take the hits for you guys. I'm the kind of guy that can take these hits. And so you have to respect him for that. He's a guy that if he thinks he's got to take a short-term hit here in order to get long-term greatness for the American economy and fairness as it relates to trade, he has the strength and muscle and the tenacity to do something like that.
Do you think, as we wrap it up, and we'll come full circle back to the Gary Cohn issue, do you think that the protectionists, the so-called nationalists within the White House have won and that the globalists, so to speak, have lost? And is that the biggest takeaway from Gary Cohn's resignation?
I don't actually think that at all. And I think you should go to some of the president's comments about the duality of his personality, where he is both an America First person, looking out for American workers and middle-class families, but he's also a globalist. He has said publicly that I'm both a globalist and a nationalist, or a globalist and America First person. He went to Davos for a reason. He knows he has to be part of the integration of the world order for global peace, security, and prosperity.
Sure, but actions and words are two different things, right? I mean, it's Gary Cohn has said America first is not America alone, but has the president stated that?
Well, I think he gave go to his speech in Davos. I think he gave a great speech in Davos. It was a 10 or 15-minute speech that really rounded out what his philosophy is. And there's a duality to the approach. I mean, there's a lot more subtlety to what he is doing than being described by the media.
Do you think he believes what Gary Cohn has said, America first is not America alone, with this trade talk?
You know, you have to ask him directly, but I do, if you just look at the speeches and in conversations with him and some of the interviews that I've read, I do believe that, yes.
Yeah. Anthony, we appreciate your time very much.
Okay, great. Scott, great to be back on your show.
Yep.
Okay, wish you the best.
All right, you too.
Hey there, thanks for checking out CNBC on YouTube. Be sure to subscribe to stay up to date on all of the day's biggest stories. You can also click on any of the videos around me to watch the latest from CNBC. Thanks for watching.